close till I get up. Time is barely on our side. I don't wanna waste what's left. The storms we chase are leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust. Yeah, no, I don't wanna waste what's left. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go. Finding life along the way, melodies we haven't played. No, I don't want no rest. Echoing around these walls, fighting to create a song. I don't wanna miss a beat. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go. And we'll grow in number, fueled by them to see the horizon.
Hey, happy Thursday, everyone. Man, today's been a day. This has definitely been a struggle. Just a real busy. Nothing too personal. Just very busy. So, yeah, if you see me kind of slacking off today, please feel free to put something in the chat. But I wanted to keep my consistency and stay with the stream, and so that's why I'm here. And tonight we're gonna take a look at it's kind of neat. It's a new product as far as the stream's concerned. It's not a new product out on the marketplace, but I would say it doesn't resonate with network engineers that as much as, let's say, like an Ansible may. So we'll kind of dive into it. So I have it up on the screen here. It's called Terraform. And before we dive into the actual tool, we're going to just quickly go over kind of that study plan I showed you a couple streams ago, and also how Terraform fits into the exam topics. So let me pull up the chat real quick just to make sure. All right, so I have the chat open. So yeah, if you have any questions, if you're new to the stream, feel free to put anything in the chat. It could be comments, questions, feedback. One thing I like to mention is I'm not always right, and there's a good chance that I may even ask the chat for answers. So feel free to put something in the chat, and yeah, it's best to have more of a discussion about it, because it helps me learn, and it helps overall everyone else learn, I think. So all right, so let's dive into it. So let's first look at kind of why we're even looking at Terraform. So I like to go back to there. I have 2 pages bookmarked, and I look at these religiously whenever I'm studying. The exam topics and the list of software and equipment that will be in the lab environment. So as far as exam topics, and I guess we'll start, with the why. Like, why are we looking at Terraform? So you'll see there's actually there's one exam topic, but it has multiple subtopics, I guess you could call it, where using Terraform to statefully manage infrastructure given support documentation. So that's kind of key, right? So it's not more or less I have to go in and study every single potential, flag, that might be in the CLI commands or every little, action. I do have to understand how it works, and some of, I would say, the more basic, get it up and running, and then obviously the topics that are covered, loop control, variables, resource retrieval, provisioning, and management of the managing the state of the provision resources. So I'll definitely have that down pat. But given, if there's support documentation, I just want to be very familiar with kind of how the documentation is laid out, whether, on Terraform site, and kind of go from there. So I would say that's kind of a tip for, for anyone kind of watching, or if you're also going after the expert exam as well, or the lab, look for these kind of little hints here, given support documentation. I remember early on, back whenever I studied for the CCNP, the Encore exam, I looked for specific keywords, and it actually helped me a lot. So, for example, like, I can't even think of the keywords on the Encore exam. But for this exam, you have create a solution, build, manage, and operate a REST API. So, given, a web application framework, and that we've already talked about. The only real web application framework that's in the list of requirements in the software list is Flask, at least from what I've seen. So I'm gonna have to know that pretty well. Build, manage, and operate. Build, manage, and operate. Here's an interesting one: consume and use. So it's not saying, here it talks about building a REST API, endpoints, requests, and response. But consume and use a new REST API given documentation. So this is a good assumption of, okay, you understand the HTTP verbs, you understand RESTful architecture, you understand how requests and responses, the different headers. Like, there's a lot that goes into just this one topic, but you can at least say, okay, it's testing on how I consume or use a new REST API given documentation. I can tell you, whenever I run into a new API, I immediately jump into Postman. I think it's one of the easiest tools out there. Other tools you may use is like curl on the CLI, in a shell. But Postman, and since that will be provided in the lab environment, I'm 100%. I'll be using Postman to kind of help, myself learn this new API, whatever it may be. But anyways, so yeah, I always, whenever I did the Encore, and I'm doing it for this exam as well, always looking for these like verbs here. Build, manage, create, configure. Now, since it's a practical exam, you're going to get more of these like do something verbs. So whereas, on Encore, you might have like design, know the different types of, a certain protocol. The big ones on the Encore exam that I remember are design and configure. There's a big difference between the two. Design is like, okay, I know the protocol in and out. I know the different nuances, the different, whether it has certain neighborship rules. Like, that's part of kind of the design. The configuration piece is, you have to obviously know that as well, but you're actually like hands-on, not necessarily hands-on keyboard with the new test exam format, but you have to know how it's configured. You might have to know the specific syntax. So anyways, I'll quit my rant on that, but not really a rant, just more or less a hint for those watching. Definitely pay attention to those keywords. So back to what we're going to be going over is Terraform. So you can see here, statefully manage infrastructure. So this is kind of where it does differentiate from your like Ansible, for example. And I'm using Ansible a lot as an example because I think that's the one platform that every network engineer thinks of or runs into when they first are looking at network automation. So, Ansible is more, you could call, procedural, right? So you have step 1, step 2, step 3, and it has to happen in that certain order. And it also, Ansible will go through the steps no matter what, right? Step 1, step 2, step 3. Terraform's a little different. Terraform says, okay, you create a file, a state file. I'm sorry, you don't create the state file. Create a Terraform configuration, right? And based on that configuration, it will build a state file, right? And it will basically say, okay, this is the state of your infrastructure, and then it will go out and touch each piece of the infrastructure that it needs to, whether it's in the cloud or if it's on-prem. It's just whatever Terraform can support, and we'll look further into that as well. So that's just at a quick high level of what Terraform is and what it's for. The easy way I kind of remember Terraform versus something like Ansible is Terraform will stand up your environment and then Ansible will configure it. Not like I know that could definitely be, debatable, but the way I think of it is, okay, Terraform, let's say you want to stand up a CSR, Cisco CSR. Terraform can actually set up your CSR in AWS, and let's say it's in AWS. It can set it up because it has a what's known as a provider called, for AWS, to where you could say, okay, given my AWS credentials, go configure it in this region with this IP, these interfaces, and it will stand it up for you. And on top of it, it will provide you, you will be able to have like a bootstrap configuration, just to get it up and running and maybe configure an interface. But as far as like ongoing maintenance or, think of it as like your, day 2 configuration, you'll want, something like an Ansible that will consistently go out and can configure the network. So like I said, there's definitely room for where Terraform can take over some of that responsibility, but that's like that's the differentiator for me, or at least how I understand it. So so let's jump into Terraform. So I have it up here. So I went through, and if you follow me on Twitter, I went through some of the 2 examples actually, and actually put them on my in my GitLab environment. So my GitLab repository, my DevNet Expert project here. So I created a Terraform directory, and they have one basic Terraform example where it's on-prem and you deploy a Docker container. And then there's another one that's AWS. And so I did both of them, and I was really impressed. I know Terraform is talked about, I believe, on the DevNet. It's definitely in the DevNet Professional on the DevCore exam. You have to kind of understand when to use Terraform, given a certain situation. And I imagine that's kind of the way it's going to be in the lab environment as well. But, and I think it might be mentioned in the associate as well. But anyways, so I have some experience with it, but now that I want to dive more deep into the practical side of it, right? Deploying infrastructure using it. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. So I do want to preface, like, I do have an understanding of Terraform, but last night kind of, the whole, like, you don't, use it or lose it. I definitely don't use it on my day-to-day, so it felt like another like revitalization of Terraform for me. So yeah, it was very cool, and I was very surprised by its capabilities. It's pretty awesome. So anyways, I kind of built these out, and that's in this DevNet Expert project in GitLab. Same username as GitHub. You literally I don't know if you can, but you probably can use the same URL, github.com/ my username DevNet Expert, because I literally named the repository and I have the same username on both GitLab and GitHub. So, but I'll put a hyperlink in the GitHub repository, in the markdown somewhere in that README file. I'll kind of have a link to this. And the reason I mentioned this in the last stream, the reason I'm using GitLab instead of GitHub for some of these more practical examples is because that's what will be used in the testing environment. And I didn't really think that through too much when I first built the GitHub repository with all the Ansible and Flask examples. So, but since I went through this software list, and GitLab is on here. Let me see. It's towards the bottom here. Yeah, so GitLab is on here, and GitHub is not. And there's a bunch of CI/CD examples and other things you have to know. So I figure, hey, let's just jump right into using GitLab, and that way I get familiar with the CI pipeline, and then also just putting my code in GitLab. So that's why I'm starting to use GitLab more, for those that are confused. All right, so let's go to what we need to kind of learn about. All right, so using using Terraform, loop control, resource graphs, use of variables, resource retrieval, resource provision, and management of the state of provision resources. This, I would say, what I've done so far, I've done 2.9e, 2.9f, and 2.9c. I haven't done any loop control. I don't know too much about resource graphs, and that's just more or less the verbiage. I may actually have experience with the resource graphs, I just don't know the verbiage. And resource retrieval, I gotta look into that, and that might, like I said, that just might be the verbiage not clicking right now. So anyways, let's take a look at what I've done so far, and then let's see if we can expand on it. So the first thing is using variables. And so let me open up my lab environment. Oh, let me get some. There we go. Gotta have some sort of background music going. More of a beat, I guess. Anyways. Okay, so I cloned did a git pull and updated the GitLab, the repository on my my VM, my Ubuntu VM that we're using for everything for this DevNet Expert practice. So you'll see this is straight from the example on Terraform site. I mentioned it before, and this isn't like a Terraform 101. Like I said, I am going to start at ground zero sometimes and kind of talk my way through things. But I don't want anyone to think this is like more like a tutorial on anything. I'll talk through things probably at ground zero and move up, but just prefacing with that. So we have required providers. So right now, providers, think of it as like plugins, ways to connect to, whether it be a cloud or another platform. They're plugins for Terraform. And I actually pulled them up here. Where'd they go? Oh, I can get rid of that. Yeah, browse providers. So you see AWS, like if you don't notice, Terraform really loves its cloud providers, and they're probably the most used, to be honest. So they're at the very top. But you can see here, bunch of HashiCorp plugins. One of the very cool one that actually is on for the exam is ACI plugin. Cisco DevNet published it. And so we're actually going to take a look at that tonight. And the reason I say that, by the way, is up here, Terraform, and then Cisco DevNet /ACI version 0.7. I don't know what version this is, but anyways, we'll take a look at this after we go through, a couple examples from last night that I completed last night. Because the idea, like I said, going back to here, you'll be given support documentation as like a reference point. It doesn't mean like, we need to skip this completely because we'll say, oh, we'll just read the documentation on test day. No, like we need to make sure we understand the different parts of a configuration file and how Terraform rolls out its changes and modifies, provision resources. So that's kind of why I'm focusing more or less on why it's used, how it's used, and then any specifics that the exam topics will cover. And obviously, as I need to still get the ACI simulator up and running, I just haven't really looked at it too much, and that's more or less on me, just because ACI is one of those things that I just don't. I've never really had like too much hands-on experience with, besides like for exams and studying for exams. And the experience I've had so far with it, I don't really like it. As bad as that sounds, I just, there's a lot of just words, like a lot of just like words that mean so many different things. Like bridging domains are actually like what technology actually, what I mean, like where you almost put like you put a name to a technology, it's like, okay, why didn't we just call it VXLANs or or VLANs or whatever's under the hood. We kind of had to put some like lofty word over it. That's just me. That's just kind of how I interpret it. It's tough for me to kind of make that mapping sometimes, where it's like, okay, example, EPGs, like endpoint groups. Okay, what, like where are, like what's under the hood? What's defining the endpoint groups really? So, but I guess that's what you get. Like that's a trade-off with having kind of that abstraction layer. And DNA Center can kind of be on the same level with creating that abstraction layer. I just have more experience with DNA Center, so that's kind of why I'm partial to it. But anyways, let's go back to the example. So you see here, we have we're using the Docker provider, and so here's something interesting. And because I have the Terraform extension installed, I get these nice little like hints or pop-ups, pop-ups in my IDE. Like you'll see here, it shows like Docker image is a type, and then Nginx here is going to be a name. Julio's, hey Julio, I'm glad you could stop by. Julio says, I have the same feeling. Maybe we blame marketing. Yeah, I mean, I agree. It sometimes can almost be like too much, because especially like you've had some really awesome blogs where you look at a piece of technology and then you dive into, okay, what's really making this up? And I'm kind of the same mindset. It's like, okay, great. Okay, we have a endpoint group that's attached to a bridging domain. Cool. What's under the hood, right? What's actually like, how are these things communicating? That's what I really care about. So yeah, we're on the same page with that. We can blame marketing, I guess. All right. So anyways, so the resource type is, you can pull that, from my understanding, you get that from the provider, right? So let's say you have a Docker provider and there's multiple different resources within the Docker module. And so Docker image is one of those resource types. So obviously Docker image, pretty self-explanatory. You name the image and then you actually put the image that you want to pull down from, I want to say it probably uses Docker Hub as its container registry. I could probably look it up. Let me do that. So, Docker provider, Terraform. It's used to interact with Docker containers. It uses Docker API to manage the lifecycle of Docker containers. And I actually got this working last night, and we'll do it here as well. You can actually, like, this will spin up a Docker container for you. Just based on your Terraform configuration, it'll spin it up for you without you having to do anything manually through, the CLI. Julio said, yep, why confuse the learner? Dude, I totally agree with you. We're on the same page. Marcos, hey, how are you? I don't know if I've seen you in the chat before. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. He says, hi, Dan, stupid question. Do you have a real-life example to use Terraform in Cisco products? I know that Terraform is used for AWS and Azure. Good question. Good question, Marcos. And that's kind of what we're looking at tonight. I had it pulled up here just a second ago. So they have Cisco DevNet actually published a ACI module or ACI provider, and what that means it basically is it's a plugin to Terraform. So you can set up ACI, and that's what I was actually just going back and forth with Julio about. Is I personally don't have much experience with ACI, but maybe you do or someone does. You can actually create a Terraform configuration file, and something this basic here, where you put your username, password, the URL to your ACI deployment, will log you in. And let's find a better example. Here we go. See, this is kind of where I'm stepping out of my wheelhouse because I don't know ACI too much, but I can tell you based on the comments, you can, so they're using the ACI provider, and it's kind of neat. You kind of have to read it from this angle. I jumped down to provider first, so I say, okay, they're using the provider called ACI, and they're providing it a list of arguments: username, password, URL, and secure. Not super important, but I see ACI provider. So what I do is I'll jump up to at the top here. I call it kind of like the global configuration of Terraform. I mean, call it what you will, but under required providers, this basically tells Terraform, okay, for this specific configuration, what providers do we need, or what plugins, right? Because remember, providers are kind of that plugin for Terraform. So we have one called ACI. We're going to name it, called ACI, and the source is Cisco DevNet /ACI. And if you go back to the overview here, you'll see, man, I wish it just said it. Let's see, hold on. Where'd it go? All right, I feel like I'm just gonna be stuck in a never-ending loop. Hold on. Cisco DevNet /ACI, right? So that's telling Terraform, okay, look up in your registry for a provider called Cisco DevNet ACI. Let me get back to the example, right? And use that as a source for this ACI provider. And then based on this provider, you're going to plug in these arguments, and then you can then use the resources. And these are all the resources here, right? So you'll see one called ACI Tenant, ACI Application Profile, and you can kind of see, right? So to answer your question, Marcos, I know I kind of went around in a circle. Yes, you can do that. And on top of that, I actually watched a course, one of the DevOps, the Cisco DevOps exam. the Cisco, I think it's called DevOps, right? Cisco DevOps. Cisco DevOps exam or certification. Yeah, so I've been watching on Pluralsight. There's a good amount of content on this DevOps exam on Pluralsight, which I like a lot. I know, a lot of people know Nick Russo, but there's a lot of other great instructors on the platform. And so I've been looking at the DevOps one because that goes more into, CI/CD, Terraform, and kind of more or less the software development side of it. And I saw that you could deploy an example where they deployed an ASAV in AWS using Terraform. And the way they did that was they used the AWS provider and specified the AMI. Like in AWS, you have the AMI ID, and they specified for an ASA, a Cisco ASA. And you could strap on, you could put on a bootstrap config. You could define interfaces, IP addresses. So yeah, anyways, bottom line, yes, you can deploy resources, virtualize resources on specific platforms as well. So if you have any sort of Cisco virtual appliances in AWS, Azure, GCP, there's a good chance you probably could use Terraform. Don't hold me to it, but it seems like there's a good chance if the images are provided, by those cloud providers. Let's see. I'm catching up on chat here. Hey, Blues. Nice to see you. I'm doing great. Thanks for being here. Does Terraform use the REST Conf API? I don't believe so. I can look into it. I guess you're getting along the lines of like how Ansible has the HTTP API connector or connection type. I don't believe so because it uses its built-in providers to connect to specific platforms. Marco says, yes, I'm new here. I'm planning to get DevNet Professional this year. Oh, cool, man. Hey, glad you're here. You're in the right spot, I think. I got my DevNet Professional in the spring of last year. I think I completed it in April. It's a tough exam, I'll tell you that much. It's definitely a tough exam, and we'll be going over a lot of things, especially assuming you're taking the Dev Core. I'm not sure any particular order, whether you're taking like the Specialist exam first and then the Dev Core, or Dev Core and then Specialist. We'll be covering some things that are probably going to be on the Dev Core exam. So definitely stay tuned in and keep asking questions. There's no dumb questions here, I promise you. I've started streaming back in, I think, early October, and there's been so much that I've done really dumb on stream. Like one time I was co-streaming with a guy, with John Capabianco, and I did a Docker. I only had like 5 gigs free on my hard drive, and I accidentally did a Docker pull, and I pulled down an image that was like 6 gigs, and it literally just fried not fried it, but like it came to a really slow stop, and then OBS crashed, my stream crashed, dude. It was so trust me, I say all that just to say there's no bad questions here and no dumb questions. Blue says, I mean to configure a tenant, AP, BD, and so on. Oh, for ACI. Yeah, I don't know how. I believe it uses, from my understanding, and I don't know. From my understanding, it basically in the background just does API calls. And then, but I'm not, like I said, I'm not too familiar with the API for ACI. I'm not saying that 5 times fast. But yeah, I believe it's making API calls in the background. Blue says it's a good exam. Yeah, so assuming you're referring to the DevOps, I've never taken it, but based on the exam blueprint and the training that's out there and just what I've seen so far, I wouldn't be against taking it. And honestly, if I had some time before May, I probably would. It looks like a fun exam. and I don't say that too often. Blues also says maybe the Terraform provider uses the REST API to configure tenants and so on. Yeah, Blues, you're spot on there. I think it uses, from my understanding, I know for a fact the AWS provider uses the AWS API to basically convert your configuration into calls. Now, how they organize that and how they do it on the back end, hey, they can keep that behind closed doors if they want. I don't think it is. I know some of this, some of the modules are open source. They've been created, but hey, I'm cool with just being the user in this situation. Marco says thanks for the advice. Yeah, no problem. And please stick around. If this is focused more or less on the DevNet Expert, as I'm preparing for it, but hey, like the Dev Core is part of the DevNet Expert. So if you have questions, or if you have questions about really anything related to automation, it could be Cisco related. Doesn't have to be. It could be something about Python. Let me know. Feel free to put it in the chat. Don't be afraid to ask. We're here to learn together. And like I said, I had that small story, but there's plenty others to go with it. I've done things. Just we all make mistakes, so let's. No one's perfect. All right, so what was I doing? Oh, yeah, the DevOps. So this is the DevOps exam. I'm not gonna, like I said, I'm not gonna go through it. $300. It's just like the other specialist exams, but the exam topics look pretty fun. Not gonna lie. They look really fun. If this loaded a little quicker. Yeah, like one section is just about CI/CD pipelines, packaging, and delivery of applications, automating infrastructure. If I had to put it from my logging, monitoring metrics, if I had to guess, like based on like the lab topics, a lot of the exam topics seem to be stemming from the DevOps exam and the network automation, the NAuto exam, the EN Auto. I call it the N Auto, but EN Auto, this one here. It seems like a lot of the DevNet lab, the DevNet Expert lab, are coming from EN Auto and the DevOps. I'll say that there's not much. There's nothing, not really anything. There's WebEx is mentioned in the exam topics. Not much with this exam. I didn't even know this really was an exam, to be honest. Just about WebEx. Nothing really on IoT. SAuto, security automation, not really. You have to understand security topics, but like automating security products or solutions, not really. SP Auto, I mean, you could take concepts from this and apply it. For example, I know in the service provider world, using Yang models, Yang data models in RESTconf and NetConf, like that's second nature. So you can probably take specific topics from this one. DC Auto, I've actually considered getting some training material for this because of how I'm just not used to the data center. I don't really mess around. Like I mentioned ACI, I'm not in the data center too much. I've messed with Nexus before, and some of the programmatic perspective of Nexus, but I need to get better with that. And then CL Auto, the collaboration, not much. And then I already covered EN Auto. And then DevCore, obviously. That's the written part of the DevNet Expert. So Blues asks API specific. Sorry, I may have got your message late, Blues. I'm not sure what you're referring to. But all right, let's dive into just going back and forth, aren't I? All right, so let's just run through an example and actually just deploy it. So we're gonna use the Docker example. So you'll see here Docker PS. There's no Docker. I don't have any Docker containers deployed right now on my machine. You'll see that I do have some images that were pulled down, a month ago, 6 weeks ago, and so on. But in this case, we're using Nginx, and what I'm going to do is do Terraform Init. So I didn't use this machine last night when I was using a MacBook, so I wasn't on this machine. So I'll use Terraform Init, and init basically initializing, and it should pull down the necessary providers. Yeah, there we go. So if I was using the same machine from last night, I wouldn't need to do this. But because I pulled in a new provider, it had to install it, and you'll see that here. And that would be the case if I, had another provider. I added one right to this, because this configuration file is supposed to define your entire infrastructure. And I'm not saying just one file. I'm sure there's ways to break it out, into different files, but that's what essentially this is supposed to do. So you would put, all your providers up here. So yeah, the init downloaded and installed the package or the provider. Docker, oh my goodness. Terraform Plan. So Terraform Plan is interesting because there's kind of multiple. The three big components with Terraform and deploying is you initialize it, right, like we just did with our pulling down our providers, only the providers we need. And then you could use, optionally, you could use Terraform Plan, which basically translates what your configuration file is declaring that it wants to do, and it will change it. And it will tell you all the changes that are going to happen, right? Kind of like a diff. So, and we won't go through each piece, but you'll see here, Terraform will perform the following actions, right? It'll create a Docker container named Nginx, and here's all the settings and the arguments that some will obviously will be known after we apply. Some you can set, so like the IP address, if I wanted to set a specific IP, I could. I kept it super simple up here. In the configuration, you can see I literally just gave it a name. That's it. Yeah. I'm sorry. Here's where I actually, because right here, yeah, so here is defining the image that we need to pull down from Docker. So there's a few components. The provider, which is for Terraform, right? Docker, the Docker provider. And then we're using the Docker image resource to define, okay, what image do I want, right? And then I create the Docker container down here, and here we're just naming it tutorial. So if you scroll down here, you'll see, okay, we named it tutorial. We're creating a Docker container named Nginx, a Docker container from the Nginx image, and then we're naming it tutorial here. Some health check, labels, port, and then the port's interesting because you have an internal port within the container and external. So 8000 will be like our local host essentially. All right, so everything looks good. Obviously, we're in a lab environment, so even if something broke, whatever. So now to deploy it, we would use Terraform Plan, Terraform. Oh my gosh. There we go. Apply. Wow, I froze right there. Dude, what did I say? It's been a wild day. It's just been a long day. Wow, okay. Yeah, sorry about that. I froze right there. I was like, Terraform Init, Plan. For some reason, I was thinking deploy, and I was like, that's not right. Yeah, so take these actions, Terraform apply. All right. So with Terraform apply, I'm going to go ahead and run this. And so it always asks you to, you have to type yes. So it goes through what we just did with Terraform Plan, and it will say, okay, you know, you have to type out yes if you actually want this to happen. So we're gonna say yes, creating the Nginx, or pulling down the Nginx Docker image. Blue said, yeah, help. Yeah, I was gonna do, it's so funny because I was just about to type that. Cool. And there you go. It looks like within, what, 15 seconds? Or no, 10 seconds. Yeah, 15 seconds. 13 seconds and 2 seconds. So within 15 seconds, we pull down the Nginx image, which it's a smaller Docker image, I'll give you that. And then we created a container based on that image. So if we go to here, so remember, this is our output before. We had no Docker no Docker containers running, and we didn't even have the Nginx image, right? So let's start from square one. Let's see if we pull down the image. All right, there we go. Nginx latest. Said it was created 3 weeks ago. I'm assuming that's probably from Docker Hub. And then we'll just do Docker PS to see if we have anything running. And we do. And you can see it's been mapped to port 8000. So let's pull up Firefox. Hey, yeah, Julio says must head out. All right, Julio. Hey, thanks for stopping by. I always appreciate you stopping by. Have a good night. And there we go. Just like that. So we have Nginx up and running. This is just the default page. But from here, you can go in that Docker container and, you know, configure whatever you want. HTML, you know, anything, website, whatever. So, but the point with Terraform is we got it up and running, right? And you're probably like, all right, cool. Who cares? Like, I can get this up and running using scripts, right? So the cool part with Terraform is you can do it all from one place, and it's in a standardized format, right? Terraform has the idea of, think of it as, okay, if you wanted to stand up a bunch of resources in AWS and then a bunch of resources in Azure or on-prem, you would have, I mean, think about all the different scripts you would have. You'd have a set of scripts that would use the AWS SDK or just raw API calls to set that up, or using the AWS CLI. You would have then same thing with Azure, and then on-prem, you may have a whole different way of contacting certain resources. Whereas with Terraform, you have the concept of a provider and resources, right? So you define the provider, right? If we wanted to deploy an AWS Azure on-prem, or let's say Docker, we would put all those providers in this file, and then we would say, okay, well, given, using a certain provider, we would say, okay, use the Docker image resource to deploy an Nginx, or pull down a Nginx image, and then deploy it, and then here are some configuration parameters. Obviously, this is very basic. And like I said, off stream, I've been kind of reading through this documentation. But I do, since I only stream, once a week, 1 to 2 hours, I want to make it worth everyone's while to not just say, okay, this is what I've been working on and just dive right into the weeds. I like providing background. So, and it does help me learn. It helps me kind of just sort my thoughts out. So, All right, so you can see here, apply complete, 2 resources have been added, 0 changed, 0 destroyed. And we just walk through how that worked. Now, let's say we wanted to change the name. Let's say we were like, okay, well, we need to deploy this tutorial container actually need to be called tutorial 2, right? So now we save it, and now, oh, and I left out a couple commands. So Terraform also has the idea of formatting, right? Just like a code formatter, right? You could use Black is a popular code formatter for Python. So Terraform has the same idea in CLI, where it's Terraform FMT. So we do that, and you can see it reformatted, and you can tell by the blue lines that some of it was reformatted. And a lot of it just has to do with spacing, but it keeps it very, the whole idea of formatting is so the look stays the same, right? So yeah, so Terraform has that. And then they have one other cool command. It's called Terraform Validate, which actually validates the syntax. Think of this as like your linting, right? So, and I guess I should take it back. It's not really linting. It's just more or less looking at your syntax, your little, the configuration file to make sure that everything is valid, right? Like you don't have like a resource under a required provider, for example. I think it goes that deep. It may just look for specific keywords, but anyways, Terraform Validate, Terraform FMT. So now you notice we made the change with the name. Tutorial went from tutorial to tutorial 2. Yikes. I don't know why I said that like 10 times. So now we're going to do Terraform Plan. Oh, and now look, check it out. We have 1 to add, 1 to destroy. Interesting. There's a lot here. So you can see, we'll start at the top. So so this is interesting. So the container will be replaced, right? So since we changed the name of the container, something that rudimentary, you have to actually, since we're managing the state of our infrastructure, it won't necessarily, it will do whatever it has to do to get to this state, right? So a Docker container running an Nginx image named tutorial 2, and there's not one named tutorial, that's going to have to, the tutorial one, because you specify the name when deploying the Docker container, will have to be destroyed. So tutorial will have to be deleted, and a new one will have to be created called tutorial 2. And you'll see here, that's kind of what's happening. Must be replaced, and you'll see there's specific values that are added. The yellow is saying they're modified. It says that basically, okay, we know, like in this case, right now we know tutorial has an entry point of this, right? But it will be changed to known after apply. Same thing, okay, this is a better, the gateway, right? And same probably with the IP address. The gateway we currently know is this IP address, but now since we're building a new container, because the name changed, we'll know that after, we'll know the new gateway after it applies. So yeah, you can see where things are getting removed. But the idea is Terraform is reading and saying, okay, I don't see tutorial anymore, but I see a tutorial 2, tear down tutorial, build tutorial 2. And all of that, just in case you're probably like, okay, how does it know all of this, right? Is it polling our environment? Is it using SNMP? Especially coming from a network mindset, the network engineer mindset, you're like, okay, it has to be monitoring our environment somehow, right? Not necessarily. It actually created a state file. So you'll see here terraform.tfstate, and this basically keeps track of everything in your environment, right? Everything that you deployed, it keeps track of. So you'll see the gateway, And I can show you all that. So I will say the TF state is something you wouldn't necessarily put in version control, because it has just so much sensitive data. But obviously we're in a lab environment. I'm not too worried about it. But you can see all the information, right? And this is just, think about it. We just have one Docker container deployed. And how many lines? Almost 140 lines, right? Of data. So yeah, anyways, so it reads from this TF state file to figure out what's changed, what needs changed. All right, so one's going to be added, one's going to be destroyed. Let's see how this works. So we'll do Terraform apply. It's going to prompt and say, hey, are you sure? We're going to be adding a container. We're going to be deleting a container. All right, destroying already done. Added, created. Already done. Took a whole second. So let's figure out why, one, why it took it only took a second, and two, did it actually work? So we'll do Docker PS again. Sure enough, created 21 seconds ago. Name is tutorial 2. If we go to localhost 8000 again, refresh, sure enough, there it is. So we're good on that aspect. Tutorial 2 has been created, and if you notice, tutorial 1's no longer there. Tutorial 2 right here, and then just tutorial, and I call it tutorial 1, but just the first container we deployed is no longer there. And so yeah, it works. As far as why and how it got deployed so fast, well, it takes 0 seconds because realistically, all they're doing in the background is, Docker remove, and they're deleting the container. They're not getting rid of the image, and so hence why it created in under a second, because it already had the image, the Nginx image. It just had to, add the parameters, the name, and the ports, and it's good to go. So yeah, that's pretty much it as far as deploying. And this is just a Docker container, and you could do this. Honestly, you could use Terraform. It's free. You can use it in your home lab, in your home environment. If you have enough infrastructure to where it would make sense to statefully manage it using the Terraform configuration file, then go for it. We're not going to dive too deep into this one, but there is an AWS example that I also did. You see here, required providers, AWS, it uses a HashiCorp provider. You can specify a particular version, just as if you would like a dependency in Python. And then from here, you can see provider profile is actually your credentials. So in order to use the AWS the AWS provider, you have to have your credentials or the AWS CLI installed on your local machine. And when you configure that, you have to have an access key and an access secret, and an access key ID and an access key secret. And when you have that, it allows this AWS provider to interact with your environment. So obviously I just use a personal environment, and if you're messing with this, obviously you'd want to use your personal test environment, and hopefully resources on the free tier. And so sorry about Blues, just let me see, give me a second. Sorry, I saw your message pop up and it just threw off my train of thought. But anyways, so yeah, you set up a profile, which, like I said, default are the default credentials that you have stood up or you configured in your environment. Region, that's the AWS region, obviously. And then here you specify a specific instance you want deployed in AWS. So I named mine app server, because remember, it's type and then the name. And then you can actually specify the AMI, right? Straight from the AWS marketplace, the AMI ID. and then the instance type. So I did a T2 micro because that's, you know, part of the free tier. And then you could tag it if you like. Anyways, so Blues, to your question, Dan, are you going to set up an ACI simulator? Yes, I need to spend some time and get that stood up. It's one of those things, it's like I said in the beginning of the stream, like I'm not too familiar with ACI, and like my interactions with it thus far, especially even from a programmatic standpoint, is like I don't love it. So it's like one of those things, like you don't really love it, but like you have to do it because it's on, you know, it's part of the test. So yeah, I will set one up though. I will be setting one up, and that'll probably be in a future stream as well. I would say I'd put it probably in like about a month or so, because after Terraform, you know, we have Ansible. Ansible will be pretty quick because we already kind of did that before, and then we'll be diving more into, you know, Yang, RESTconf, NetConf, and so on. And then probably right after that, we'll be looking at ACI. So, but yes, to answer your question, yeah, I'll be setting up a ACI simulator. The only other thing I wanted to touch on with these examples are variables and outputs. So you can actually specify variables and specific. You can put it in your configuration file. Like you can put it directly in here, but because they're easier to manage sometimes in a separate file, you can create a variables.tf file, name the variable, and then give it like I consider it like almost where you're like man, this is, what am I trying to say? You're statically typing it. So like you're actually saying, okay, it's a string or an integer, right? Versus like a dynamically typed where you just assign it whatever. You give it a name and you give it a value, and given that value, it's interpreted as a string, an integer, or whatever. So here, you know, we defined a variable called instance name, gave it a description, a type, and then a default value. So if you don't provide any sort of name to this variable or any sort of string value, then the default is going to be called example app server instance 2. That was what was in the example, example on the Terraform website. So that's why I'm using such a long name as a default. But the reason I bring that up is that I'm using it right here. So you'll see name equals var dot, and the dot notation is used all throughout your Terraform configuration. But you know, var dot instance name, which is the name of the variable here. So if I put another variable name called instance type, I can put var dot instance type, and I would put it right here. So that's another example. So that's kind of using variables. And then outputs. Outputs are basically, you can tell Terraform when it's done applying a configuration to output specific values. So that way, like at the end of it, you could say, you could almost, it's like printing a value. Like if you've ever done coding, just a print statement, right? Like, okay, print, I'm here. Or, you know what I mean? Like when you're debugging, sometimes you put a print statement in the middle of a function or something. That's what the outputs are. You kind of can put at the end of, after Terraform applied your configuration, you can put specific values of a specific instance, right? Or a specific resource. So in this case, we have an AWS instance named app server, and then there's a bunch of attributes that you can get, you know, and you can read through the documentation. All this is in the documentation. But you can see we have AWS instance app server dot ID. So we want to know the ID or the instance type, and here's the description. So luckily, like instance type is a good example because, you know, AWS instance app server instance type. So T2 micro is going to be printed out in that case. So, but yeah, it's just like I said, it's just a nice to have. You can print it out at the end. I'm sure you can do some other things with the output, but you know, that's kind of the way I like to put it. It's almost like a, you know, a print statement. All right. So yeah, those are the two examples. I'm not done. I'll tell you this. I'm not done with Terraform. I'll be doing some things off stream with it. But I would highly encourage those, you guys watching, especially like Marcos, you mentioned you're doing the DevNet Professional. Definitely at least do these examples that I just kind of walk through and actually kind of type them out and understand how things connect and the hierarchy of it. Because it will really help you appreciate specific things and specific use cases that Terraform would cover that, let's say, Ansible wouldn't. So like if you try doing like what I'm doing here with AWS in Ansible, it would look way different, because in Ansible, as I mentioned, it's procedural. So you'll have to put on like, okay, log in, create the VM, assign, I'm trying to think of a good example. I'm just like I said, I'm kind of tired today, but you get the idea. Step 1, step 2, step 3. The real power of Terraform comes with what I just showed you, like if you need to modify the environment. So let's say if you needed to go, okay, I have an app server and the app owner says, oh man, I got to scale this up, or I'd like to scale it up. Instead of going in and like building a new instance and calling it, going through and copy and pasting items, you literally just have to say, okay, instead of a T2 micro, let's do a T4 micro, right? So you literally just do T4 and save it, and then do Terraform apply. Boom, dude, it's there. So not to say that it won't destroy your old instance and deploy a new instance, because that's exactly what it will do, but it will do it in a way it has kind of a mind in the, there's actually kind of like a little Terraform brain in the background that knows the procedure and the way to do it in a way that reduces, your downtime. So like in this case, it destroyed, like you can see here, it destroyed, the instance, but then it brought up the new one. That that's not a good example of what I just said, but you get the idea. It knows what to do for a specific situation. So if we change the instance, let's say the tag, right? The tag doesn't require you to delete this instance and then rebuild it, because it's just editing a value. And Terraform knows that, and it will figure it out. But let's say that you want to change the instance type, it will destroy the current instance and build a new one on the new instance type, given all the rest of your parameters. So there's no copy and paste. There's no, oh yeah, like, hey app owner, give me a week, or give me like a few days. I'll build your new instance. I'll get all the IPs and everything stood up for it. There's none of that. You can do it all through this configuration and deploy it anytime. And there will be a window, I'm sure, where you have to schedule with the app owner and be like, hey, one of these containers or one of these VMs are going to be destroyed, so just, hey, keep in mind that that's going to have to happen. So anyways, that's Terraform. At least from what I've learned. And actually, I will tell you this, I've talking it through just tonight really helped me out, especially with the resources and how they, and the providers, talking it over, with everyone in the chat. It helped me. So I appreciate, everyone that's here and is able to stick around, and those that couldn't, like Julio. But you guys are you guys are great. So okay, so what I want to do is I want to probably start wrapping up soon. Like I said, it's just been a long day. So before I wrap up, I'm not going to save any of this. So before I wrap up, I'm just going to discard these. Maybe. Now that we have a little understanding of of Terraform, let's go through that document about the ACI provider, maybe. So we have the ACI provider, and then we have all these resources here. So let's just take one. It says generate certificate. All right, so a tenant, creating a tenant. That makes enough. I mean, that makes sense. Or an application profile. I'm actually familiar with this, creating an application profile. So you can see here that there's so much. If you know ACI, I'm sure you can look at this and be like, oh wow, like that's a lot of like cool things we can do. To me, I'm like, all right, like some of it rings a bell, you know, the tenants and the different application profiles, and then creating like, you know, bridge domains and endpoint groups, and so there are a few things that I know, but let's just take ACI application profile, for example. So application management, ACI application profile. So here's a really good example, right? So we can, this is how you would define it. Obviously it's a resource under the ACI provider. The type matches exactly, you know, ACI underscore application profile. And then we would name the profile, or I'm sorry, we would name the resource. And this is different than naming the profile like it would show up in ACI. I just want to make that clear. And then you can see the different arguments. And that's all these are. Anything between the curly braces for a resource are just arguments. And you can see tenant DN, a distinguished name for a parent tenant, the name of the object. So this would be the actual name of the application profile that shows up in ACI. And then all the other, looks like all the other arguments are optional, but you can add them in as well. So if you authenticated with your ACI instance and put this into your configuration file, it would create and maintain an application profile called demo AP. And as we saw with the Docker profile, or I'm sorry, the Docker example, if any of this changes, right, even let's say the description, and let's say, you know, for our demo we said from Terraform, but let's say, okay, we've established Terraform is what we're going to be using moving forward. Let's create the description as something meaningful. And let's say we want to change the name. In that case, if you change the description and name in this particular configuration file, there's a good chance that it would delete this application profile from ACI and then create a new one with the new name and with the description. If you were just changing something like a description, then it wouldn't go through and actually delete the profile and then create a new one. It would just modify the existing description. So just as if you have to think Terraform's doing exactly what you would do, but just more in a, as it says, like in a stateful way, where you define the state and it will make the required changes to adhere to that state. So yeah, so in the meantime, I'm going to be looking through, like I said, I'll be looking through this documentation. My goal with this is to have get the ACI simulator up and running, and potentially somehow see if I can connect my Ubuntu machine here to see if I can connect into the ACI simulator. I'm not too sure about the ACI simulator. I don't know what all it entails, but assuming that it just, you know, simulates ACI, we'll deploy it as another VM on my, on the local server, and then have Ubuntu connect into it, and then use Terraform to manage it. That's kind of the end goal. And I'll probably, like I said, revisit that when we go into ACI or the ACI simulator, which give or take probably about a month, so like mid to the end of February, is probably when I'll start diving into ACI a little more. And once I do that, then we'll revisit Terraform. And I kind of like this, it took me a while to think through this, but I kind of like the idea of having to revisit specific topics. So I know we talked about CI/CD last week. I'll definitely be revisiting that, especially with when we get to Docker, containerization, Kubernetes, figuring out how we can get that involved with, the CI pipeline and creating one with it. And we still have to kind of expand on the existing one, because I remember the last time all we got to was formatting our code. Yeah. Yeah, before this, yeah. All we did was we created a virtual environment, installed the requirements, and then all we did formatted our code, or didn't even format it. We just checked to see if it would be formatted. So there's a lot that we could do with this. But like I said, I like the idea of having to go back into it in the future, because it's kind of like the repetitive kind of spaced learning where it's like, okay, you go hard at it for a couple days, and then a week later you revisit it and see how much you remember, because ultimately that's kind of what I have to do anyways. Because if let's say I just went weeks at a time just like grinding a specific topic, all the topics I grinded through January and February, by the time May got here, I'd be so lost. So I'm okay with kind of revisiting some of this. So yeah, that's all I have for tonight. Like I said, I wasn't planning to go too long tonight, just because, like I said, just the day got ahead of me. Just been busy. So yeah, if anyone has questions, the chat was, I appreciate everyone that was in the chat tonight. I love whenever there's a back and forth and we can collaborate. So yeah, if there's any more questions, I'm probably about 30 seconds ahead. So you'll have to give me some time for your questions to come through, but feel free to put anything in the chat you want. I'll try to, wrap it up with that, and then we'll call it there. While we wait, so this is my study plan. I mentioned it or showed it on a previous stream. High level, the books I'm reading over, the weekly study plan. Yeah, Marcus. I'm really glad you joined. I hope you stick around. Like I said, every Thursday, 8 p.m. I try to put it out on Twitter to remind everyone. But yeah, if you have any questions, Marcus, like if as you're studying, throughout the week or whatever, feel free to hit me up on Twitter. If you have any questions, or if you just want any advice about anything, feel free to bounce them off me. That's what I'm here for. So, but thank you again for stopping by tonight. So, yeah, with the study plan, I kind of marked everything, and I marked it. Green means I'm good. Yellow means I didn't really get to all of it. So last week I didn't really get to. We built and consumed a Flask API, but there's some headers and tokens and secrets and stuff. I didn't get that deep into it. This week, all about CI/CD, Terraform, Ansible, practice Terraform, Ansible, and built it. Built. Maybe I should change that to build. Builds CI/CD. Marcos asks, do you have a study plan for DevNet Professional that you can share? I don't. So I only, I just built this study plan because there's not much, besides the exam topics, there's not much of guidance as far as the DevNet Expert. the exam topics and then like suggested learning labs. But I kind of had to situate my thoughts and put it on paper. So that's what I built this for. I do know that Nick Russo, I'm not sure if you follow him on Twitter or have heard of him. He's a Pluralsight instructor as well. He has a really good, on his site, he has a good training plan. I don't know, the DevCore, I believe he has a DevNet Professional one. So I would say check him out first. But yeah, sorry, I didn't write anything on paper for the DevCore or, in a Excel or Google Sheets. But yeah, so yeah, we're kind of slowly knocking out this. This is gonna sound crazy, probably sound like I'm giving up on the book resource, but I may start phasing out the book, specifically the Cisco Press one, because it's very fundamental, and it eats up a lot of study time, and ultimately I'm just reading and taking notes, so it's not that practical either. So there's a chance that I might change this up over the next, probably this weekend, because I actually have some free time this weekend, that I might just start using this as more of a reference instead of like I have to read these 2 to 3 chapters a week, only because I need more time in front of the computer and in the lab. I just know I'll get myself into a trap by like beginning of March. I'll be like, oh no, I didn't do, I read about it, I took notes on it, but I've not like hands-on keyboard and practice. So we'll see. I'm pretty sure I'll probably just start like using this as a reference and not necessarily like something I need to check off my list, if that makes sense. So because over the past couple weeks doing the CI/CD and practicing Terraform and Ansible, just doing hands-on, it's such a different experience versus taking notes and reading like you traditionally would. So yeah, I'll probably start phasing that out, at least some of the book, the Cisco Press book, because it's just big. I think it's like 11 it's over 1,000 pages for sure. Yeah, okay, cool. Hey, thanks for everyone kind of jumping in there. So Blues said, yeah, Nick Russo has one. Ganesh says, hey, cannot stay today, but I'll catch up later. Ganesh, hey, I'm glad you're here. You're always here. I love it. No, thanks for, we're ending soon anyways. I'm kind of just wrapping up here. And Ganesh also says Nick has a plan. So yeah, let me see. I'll just search it for you. Nick Russo, DevNet Professional. Let me see based on if I can pull up anything. So I will tell you he has a DevNet on Pluralsight. So I actually use this Pluralsight. It's very cheap. It's like $30 a month. And they have sales sometimes, so you even get a better deal. They have like a whole training path for DevNet Professional. And they're very, I'll tell you this, they're different from other videos where they're concise and they'll tell you what you need to do and provide an example, but they put the onus on you to actually test it out yourself. Okay, Marco says he's got it. Okay, cool. DevCore. All right, well then I'll exit out of that. But yeah, he's a solid resource. Nick is a solid resource. But anyways, I could talk all night probably about the study plan and what I need to change and bore everyone. But yeah, I'm gonna, like I said, the book references, you may start seeing this column. It's gonna stay here because, like I said, once I get down to right here, network programmability, and then the Kubernetes book, these are smaller books that will take less time. And since, we all have 24 hours in a day, and it goes by quick. So I don't want to spend, 3 hours a night just reading books and taking notes. I need to be more hands-on. So I quickly realized that with the first couple weeks. So I'm going to probably switch things up with the book reading, at least till, end of January, or I'm sorry, end of February, when we get to model-driven telemetry and Yang data models. So that's it. That's all I have for this Thursday. As always, Twitter's the best way to get a hold of me, at DevNetDan. If you have any questions, feedback, or just if you just want, I don't know how much advice I could give you, but or how much valid advice, but if you have any questions, whether be about certifications, or you have a network automation problem, or just like, hey, is this a good way to solve it? I don't mind brainstorming. So I'm here to help. That's kind of the whole point of the stream, is learning in public and allowing others to kind of join in and ask questions. I think tonight was a good example of that. Marcos, awesome that you joined, and it seems you definitely want to learn as well. And yeah, you can see we got a good group of people here. So all right. Okay, we got a couple more messages rolling in. Oh, okay. So Blues is saying search for DevNet Expert Learning Matrix for Nick Russo. Okay. Or let's see what this brings up. Learning content. Let's see if it opens in I forgot I even have LibreOffice. I don't have Microsoft Office on this computer. Oh. All right, hold on. Sorry. It's like taking up the whole screen. Oh, cool. Yeah, so this is more. So this, I think they added some things to this, because I remember V1. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. So this, I have the version 1. I don't know when they came out with this one. But yeah, thank you, Blues. I haven't seen this version 2 yet. So yeah, so this is the one that I was talking about. They have like DevNet Learning Labs. Like you click on these links and you go to each of the labs. Cisco Live presentations as well, vendor documentation, books. So yeah, I actually know about the books because this fundamentals one's the Cisco Press book I just talked about, how it's very fundamental. That I'll probably be more using as a reference. The network programmability with Yang. This one I'm actually excited about. It's on my list as well. And I think that's it. I have to look at the other ones. But yeah, no, this is great. Thank you, Blues. I have not looked at this, so I haven't looked at this version 2 at least. So. All right, so yeah, this will actually be something cool. I'll read this over the weekend, and maybe I'll integrate it into some of my learning as well, or my study plan. But I really appreciate it, Blues. This actually could be a lifesaver, depending if I pass. But cool. All right, well, like I said, I'm gonna wrap it up. 2 weeks to go, probably till registration. This, like I said, it's more tentative. I don't know if this is for sure the date, but according to a few resources I've seen online, you can schedule your expert level exam, lab, practical exam 3 months ahead of time. So that's why I have, how many days are remaining till then, about 2 weeks. As soon as that day hits or registration opens, I'm going to try to be be on that first day, first couple, that first week at least. So yeah, so we'll kind of see where it goes. But like I said, thanks for everyone stopping by, and if you have any questions, Twitter's the best place to find me. All right, I'll talk to you guys later. See ya.
Hold me close till I get up. Time is barely on our side. I don't wanna waste what's left. The storms we chase are leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust.